Have you ever imagined that just one meal on an airplane could expose a truth that you have been trying to endure in silence for years? That's what happened to Aaliyah Grant, a successful, calm, powerful black female CEO on a first class flight where people still expect perfect service. She was denied the meal she had pre ordered. No reasonable explanation, no respectful glance, just a cold sandwich placed on the ground as if her presence didn't matter. But it's not the food that counts, it's the choices. If it were you, would you stay silent and let it pass, or would you stand up, not to retaliate, but to end the injustice that too many have suffered? Because sometimes the question isn't what they did to you, but whether you let it define you. Join us on this story, an emotional, thoughtful journey where one woman's calmness shook the system. If the story touches you, remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to continue accompanying meaningful journeys like this. The first sign that the evening was about to turn into something unforgettable appeared as a small, almost invisible crack in the air inside Liberty Air Flight 908. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was simply a moment quiet, subtle, and sharp enough to change the direction of a life. The cabin door had just closed behind the last first-class passenger. Outside the window, the orange glow of a late summer sunset dipped behind the runways of Los Angeles International Airport, spreading warm streaks of gold across the metallic skin of the aircraft. Everything felt calm. Everything felt predictable. But calm, sometimes, is only the surface of a storm. Dr. Aaliyah Grant eased herself into seat 1A, placing her leather carry-on gently beneath the seat in front of her. She moved with a practiced grace, measured, composed, almost quiet in the way people become quiet after surviving too much noise in life. Her dark brown skin shimmered in the soft cabin lights. She wore a charcoal blazer, simple and elegant, paired with a deep green blouse that contrasted beautifully against the golden tones surrounding her. Her hair, styled in natural tight curls, was pinned neatly behind her ears, revealing a face marked by the kind of strength people rarely forget. There were no diamonds, no designer logos screaming for attention. Just a woman who carried authority the way others carried luggage naturally, because she had earned it. The kind of person who didn't need to prove she belonged. And yet, in the first-class cabin of Liberty Air, belonging was always a question whispered in silence. A businessman in seat 1C, a tall man with silver hair and an expensive navy suit, glanced at her, not for acknowledgement, but for assessment. But his gaze lingered 1 second too long. A familiar look? A measuring look? Aaliyah felt it immediately. She didn't flinch. She had been looked at with that same expression in conference rooms from Washington, D.C. to Silicon Valley. The expression of someone silently trying to decide whether she was the assistant, the guest, or simply lost. Almost never the CEO, almost never the genius behind one of the most advanced quantum security systems in the country. She opened a book instead of reacting a habit she had developed in her 20s. A book was the perfect shield, a quiet, polite barrier between her and an unspoken judgment. Today it was a worn paperback of Maya Angelou's letters, something she carried whenever she traveled for work. Words that reminded her of where she came from and why she kept going. The flight attendants moved through the cabin preparing for takeoff. Clinking glasses, soft greetings, polished smiles. Then came the first shift. Heather Coleman. The senior flight attendant, blonde hair arranged into a tight bun, lipstick carefully painted, posture impeccable, stopped beside seat 1A. Her smile held the flawless symmetry of someone trained to charm, but her eyes? Her eyes carried a different temperature, a colder one. "Good evening," Heather said. "Welcome aboard, ma'am." Her voice slid between sweetness and formality. But Aaliyah caught something underneath it. A flicker. A slight change in tone. Most people wouldn't have noticed. But she did. She always did. "Good evening." Aaliyah responded gently. "I'm Dr. Grant. I pre-ordered a keto meal for tonight's flight. Salmon with steamed vegetables. No dairy." Heather paused. Not long. Just enough to reveal she wasn't expecting that kind of passenger to make that kind of request. Well, Heather said, tapping her tablet. I'll check on that once we're airborne. Aaliyah nodded, offering a polite, grateful smile. Thank you. But Heather had already turned. Her smile warmed instantly when she greeted the man in seat 1C. Mr. Randall, so good to see you again. Champagne. Her tone was different, sharper, brighter, dripping with familiarity. Aaliyah exhaled softly. She had not been offered champagne. She wasn't surprised. Marcus Hayes, a younger flight attendant with kind eyes and a nervous posture, approached her row next. He seemed newer, less polished. He greeted her carefully and placed a glass of water on her tray. He didn't make eye contact for long, but the flicker in his gaze told her he saw everything. More importantly, he understood. Sometimes empathy is visible even in the lowest whisper of a look. The engines hummed as the aircraft began to back away from the gate. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, replacing golden warm light with a deeper, more intimate glow. The kind pilots used to calm a plane full of tired passengers. Aaliyah set her book aside and leaned her head back. She had taken this flight route dozens of times. LAX to Seattle, Seattle to DLC, meetings, presentations, policy reviews, sleepless nights. She had built her life on long flights and quiet battles. Still, tonight felt different. There was a heaviness sitting quietly beside her, a kind of weight that only comes from years of swallowing small moments that shouldn't have to be swallowed. She closed her eyes for a moment. Maybe I'm just tired, she thought. Maybe this is nothing. Just another small cut in a long line of small cuts. But the truth was deeper, and she knew it. A person can only carry so many cuts before they turn into something else, something sharp enough to change direction. The captain's voice crackled through the cabin speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we're cleared for takeoff. Please fasten your seatbelts. Aaliyah clicked her buckle, took a slow breath, and stared straight ahead. Her mind drifted to the email her mother had sent that morning, a simple message. Nothing dramatic. Keep your head high today, and protect your peace. Love, Mom. Her mother always knew. The plane accelerated, lifted, broke through the last layer of light and entered the deep blue above the city. For a moment, everything felt still, beautifully still, the kind of stillness that lets a person breathe fully. Then the turbulence inside the cabin began not from the sky, but from a simple tray being placed on a table. Heather reappeared, her expression as perfect as porcelain. She held a white tray with a single plastic-wrapped sandwich, wheat bread, processed turkey, a small packet of mustard. Here you go, ma'am, Heather said. This is your meal for the evening. Aaliyah blinked. I'm sorry, she said softly. That isn't the meal I ordered. Heather tilted her head, her voice smooth and dismissive. Your special meal didn't make it on board. It happens. But this should be fine for you. Fine for you. The words hung heavy in the air, not loud, not shouted, but they carried the sting of assumption, the kind that chips away at a person bit by bit. Aaliyah sat still. Her chest tightened, not with anger, but with a quiet, tired ache she had felt too many times. Behind her, someone chuckled softly. Someone whispered, Figures. Another quiet cut. Another moment she wasn't supposed to react to. Her fingers curled slightly on her lap. A tiny, barely visible movement. The body's way of holding itself together. Heather didn't ask if she needed anything else. Didn't offer alternatives. Didn't apologize. She simply turned and walked away, smiling warmly at the man behind her, offering him the steak dinner he had only requested minutes before boarding. Aaliyah stared at the sandwich on her tray. Such a simple object. So ordinary. And yet, in that single moment, it became a symbol of something infinitely larger. A symbol of every time she had been made to feel out of place. Every time she had been overlooked, dismissed, judged before speaking, measured before being known. A heartbeat passed, then another, and then something changed in her eyes. A shift. A quiet, focused clarity. The kind of clarity that comes not from anger, but from a lifetime of learning exactly when silence should end. She picked up her tablet, unlocked it, and opened a program that very few people in the world knew existed. Quantum grid, her own design, her own system, her own weapon built not to attack, but to reveal the truth. The moment everything shifted was right here. Not loud, not violent, just a woman with a cold sandwich, a lifetime of quiet scars, and a resolve forged from discipline and dignity. And in that stillness, she whispered to herself, "Not this time." The tablet screen dimmed again as the aircraft leveled into its steady climb. The quiet hum filled the cabin, almost soothing. But inside Aaliyah, the heaviness from earlier lingered. She closed the quantum grid interface for a moment and let her hands rest on her lap. The sting from Heather's tone echoed faintly in her thoughts. It was strange how the smallest gestures could carry the sharpest edges. To steady her breath, she let her mind drift back to the hours before she stepped on board. Sometimes a memory, even a simple one, could help her find balance again. That day began with a soft drizzle brushing over the streets of Los Angeles. The air carried a hint of warmth, like the city had not completely left summer behind. Aaliyah stepped out of her townhouse in Encino, holding a travel mug that still radiated heat. She always brewed her own coffee on travel days. It grounded her better than anything else. Cars merged quietly on the road. Neighbors walked their dogs. Nothing dramatic, just the kind of peaceful ordinary she rarely got to enjoy for long. Her work had turned every week into a sequence of policy reviews, government briefings, and late nights with glowing monitors. That morning, though, she allowed herself a moment to stand still on the sidewalk and watch the city breathe. She remembered glancing at the sky and murmuring a small prayer of gratitude. Not for luck, just for strength. Once she reached her office, she was greeted by the familiar scent of paper, warm servers, and a faint trace of lavender from the diffuser her assistant insisted on keeping filled. The reception area of Grant Intelligence Systems always felt calm. The walls were decorated with framed photos of her team, many from communities that had once believed doors like this were closed to them. She made sure those photos stayed visible. She wanted every visitor to understand who built this company. Waiting on her desk was the binder she needed to deliver to the Department of Energy. The contract tucked inside was the culmination of years of testing, hundreds of research hours, and a vision that once seemed too bold. Quantum Grid had started as a sketch in her college notebook. Back then, she was the girl professors spoke over, the girl classmates underestimated, the girl who had to raise her hand twice just to get called on once. She ran her hand across the binder before placing it carefully inside her travel case. The moment her fingers touched the leather, she felt the familiar reminder of responsibility. It was not pressure. It was purpose. As she zipped the case shut, her phone buzzed. A notification from her mother. Aaliyah paused, letting the screen light catch her attention. The message read, "I know you are traveling today. Always remember who you are. You do not have to be loud to be strong." She held the phone for a moment, pressing her thumb against the back as if holding her mother's hand through the glass. Her mother rarely wrote long messages. Every word carried weight. Those words followed her everywhere she went. In the lobby, her driver loaded her luggage into the car. She always brought the same set on work trips, a dark gray suitcase, slightly worn around the edges. She believed that the more a suitcase aged, the more stories it carried. Hers carried many. The ride to the airport passed through quiet neighborhoods, then onto the freeway with its steady tide of vehicles. Palm trees lined the median. She watched them sway gently, their silhouettes reflecting on the car window. The world outside seemed almost slow, which gave her mind space to wander. She found herself thinking about a meeting from earlier in the week. A room full of executives, all men except her. The topic had been national energy security. Someone had asked if she could explain her quantum encryption proposal in simpler terms, as if she were lecturing children. Another whispered comment had floated across the table. Something about affirmative action. Something meant to sound like a joke. She remembered her steady smile. She remembered her calm voice. She remembered responding by presenting a flawless demonstration, that left the entire room silent. Moments like that were victories, but they were tiring victories. They asked her to wear armor even when she craved softness. The memory made her chest tighten again as she sat in seat 1A. Maybe that was what made today hurt more deeply. Not the sandwich, not the tone, but the accumulation of everything that came before it. The car had pulled into the VIP entrance at LAX. A porter in a Navy uniform opened the door with a polite greeting. He recognized her from previous trips and offered to help with her luggage. She declined with a gentle smile. She preferred carrying her own bags. It reminded her she did not need anyone to soften her path. Inside the lounge, she sat alone with a cup of mint tea. It was one of the few quiet places left in her life. A television murmured in the background, reporting on a new technology bill that Congress was pushing forward. She listened half-heartedly. Politics had a way of draining her unless she was directly involved in the conversation. A notification chimed on her phone again. This time it was Evelyn Ross, her chief operations officer. Message: review the appendix before the briefing tomorrow. You may want to adjust the phrasing around federal compliance. Evelyn always noticed things before anyone else. Smart, steady, loyal. Aaliyah relied on her more than she admitted. She reviewed the appendix, rewrote several lines for clarity, then leaned back in her seat. For a brief moment, she closed her eyes. She had not slept well the night before. Too much planning. Too many responsibilities lining up like soldiers awaiting orders. When her flight number appeared on the screen, she gathered her bag and walked toward the gate. People moved aside politely, though some stared longer than necessary. A black woman traveling alone in first class always drew attention. She had grown used to it, though the sting never truly left. Stepping into the aircraft aisle, she inhaled the familiar scent of jet fuel mixed with cold air from the ventilation system. The cabin lights wrapped the space in a soft glow. First class smelled of leather and citrus cleaning spray, a polished kind of quiet. She approached seat 1A and placed her carry-on inside the overhead compartment. The click of the latch closing felt final, like placing a boundary between the world she had left outside and the one she was stepping into now. That was when Heather greeted her with the first hint of coldness, and the rest of the evening followed its course. Now sitting thousands of feet above the coastline, Aaliyah folded her hands together, letting memories settle quietly inside her. She realized the events before boarding mattered more than she first believed. They shaped how she walked through the present moment. They influenced why the slight from Heather pierced so deeply. She wasn't reacting to one sandwich. She was responding to a lifetime of being measured unfairly. The cabin light glowed softly on her skin. She took a slow breath, gathering her calm again. She would need it for whatever came next. The flight settled into a gentle rhythm as Liberty Air Flight 908 leveled above the coastline. Clouds drifted beneath the aircraft like soft white fields, their edges glowing under the fading colors of the sky. Inside the cabin, the dim lights formed a warm halo over the first-class seats, creating an illusion of comfort. It looked peaceful, almost serene. Yet beneath that polished calm, a different kind of atmosphere lived quietly. It was the kind people rarely named, but everyone felt. Rules that weren't written anywhere, but shaped every gesture. Aaliyah sensed it the moment she stepped through the cabin doorway earlier. Now, sitting in seat 1A, she felt it again with even greater clarity. The space seemed friendly, yet somehow selective. Soft, yet strangely distant. A woman across the aisle adjusted her pearl necklace while stealing a glance at Aaliyah. The look was brief, but carried a question under its surface. A question Aaliyah had seen in offices, hotel lobbies, corporate boardrooms, even at charity galas. Do you truly belong here? It hurt less now than it did years ago, but it still found its way under the skin. Aaliyah inhaled slowly, letting her breath settle. She reminded herself that she belonged not because of a seat assignment or a ticket class. She belonged because she had earned everything she carried. Her expertise, her resilience, her presence in rooms she once only dreamed of entering. A soft, scraping sound pulled her attention. Mr. Randall in seat 1C shifted his briefcase, placing it upright near his leg. The metal clasp clicked loudly as he snapped it closed. He glanced at Aaliyah with a polite expression. but there was a hint of distance in his eyes, as if he was unsure how to engage with her. He opened a newspaper and angled it slightly away, forming a barrier without appearing obvious. Tiny things and small gestures, yet they formed an entire unspoken language. The murmur of conversation rose from a few rows behind. A pair of executives discussed a merger in Denver. Their voices blended with the soft clinks of glass as a young attendant refreshed drinks. The sound of champagne pouring bubbled softly like distant applause. Marcus approached with a tray of fresh napkins. His movements were careful, almost tentative, as if he didn't want to disrupt anything. He paused by Aaliyah's row and lowered his voice. "Let me know if you need anything, Dr. Grant." His tone carried something genuine, not exaggerated, not forced, just real. She gave him a small smile. "Thank you, Marcus." The simple exchange felt grounding. It reminded her that even in uncomfortable environments, kindness had a way of slipping through. Marcus continued down the aisle, straightening glasses and tidying trays. Aaliyah watched him move. His shoulders seemed slightly tight, as if he lived every second calculating how his actions might be judged by the senior crew. He wasn't treated like Heather. He wasn't offered the same ease or confidence. He carried a quiet fear of making the wrong impression. Another familiar pattern. Several minutes passed while passengers adjusted their seats or scrolled through their screens. The mood inside the cabin shifted into a quiet routine, yet the air felt weighted with the echoes of earlier moments. Heather's dismissal, the unbalanced warmth toward others, the sandwich sitting untouched on Aaliyah's tray. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Heather emerged again with her signature poise, gliding between the rows with practiced elegance. She checked on seat 1C first, leaning slightly closer as she spoke. "Is the steak cooked to your liking, Mr. Randall?" "Absolutely perfect, thank you." Her laugh floated softly, a pleasant melody crafted for customer service. After the brief exchange, Heather turned and walked past Aaliyah without stopping, not even a glance at the untouched sandwich. The tray might as well have been invisible to her. Once again, an unspoken rule played out in full view. A rule that said some passengers deserved attention, while others deserved only the minimum. Aaliyah lowered her gaze to her hands. They rested calmly, but her pulse held a muted thrum. She had endured countless variations of these moments. Restaurants, hotels, airports, lectures. Everywhere she carried her achievements. She also carried the burden of being seen through a distorted lens. She opened her book again, though she was no longer reading. Her thoughts drifted to her father, who used to tell her that the most dangerous form of prejudice was the kind that wore a polite smile, the kind that never raised its voice, the kind that dressed itself in courtesy while slowly stripping someone of dignity. That kind was harder to confront, harder to prove, harder to defend against. She lifted her eyes and scanned the cabin. Every polished surface, every carefully curated detail, everything felt designed to create comfort, but only for some. Others had to carve out their own comfort from the edges. The quiet continued until a soft sigh escaped someone a few seats back. A man there whispered something to his partner. The words traveled just far enough for Aaliyah to hear. She probably misunderstood. These things happen. His tone implied it was harmless. His partner nodded lightly as if this explanation settled everything. A simple misunderstanding. An easy excuse. A reason used repeatedly across time to soften the rough edges of discrimination while protecting the ones who delivered it. Aaliyah closed her eyes. The ache inside her spread slowly, almost tenderly. Not anger. Something older. Something bone deep. A kind of sorrow that came from too many similar experiences. She swallowed once, grounding herself. A movement by the galley pulled her attention. Marcus stood with a stack of glasses, listening to something Heather was saying quietly. Her posture was stiff, and the slight narrowing of her eyes suggested criticism. Marcus nodded repeatedly, shoulders shrinking a little more with each second. When she turned away, he let out a breath and pressed his hand briefly against the counter edge. Aaliyah's heart tightened. She recognized that posture, the posture of someone trying to survive in silence. Her eyes drifted back to the untouched sandwich. It sat beneath the cabin lights like a reminder of everything unspoken, everything she had been forced to swallow for years, everything she had once believed she needed to accept to keep peace. She reached toward the tray, not to eat it, but to move it aside. The plastic wrap crinkled softly beneath her fingers, giving off the faint smell of processed turkey. The sight of the sandwich placed next to her leather notebook felt painfully symbolic. One represented her years of excellence. The other represented the way she was still seen by many. A sigh left her chest. Unforced and quiet? Moments like these had shaped her entire adulthood. They were small enough to be denied, yet deep enough to scar. She had become an expert in keeping her composure, but she was also human. She felt every slight, even if she showed none of it. A flicker of doubt passed through her. Am I reading too much into this? Is this really worth reacting to? But another voice rose inside her. A voice forged from years of restraint. A voice that whispered truths she often pushed aside. If I let this stand, it will continue. Not just for me, but for every person who looks like me. She sat up slightly straighter, letting her spine align with deliberate intention. The cabin remained peaceful. Passengers sipped wine. Flight staff tended to small tasks. Overhead lights cast warm halos across the glossy surfaces. Yet beneath all of it, something was shifting. Not in the cabin, in her. The moment she realized it, her hand moved instinctively toward her tablet. The soft glow inside the cabin seemed almost gentle as Aaliyah reached for her tablet. The screen stayed dark for a moment, as though waiting for her resolve to settle. She let her fingers rest on the edge, steadying her breath. A slight tremor traveled through her chest, not from fear, but from something more delicate, almost fragile. A mixture of tiredness and dignity, woven into one. She had no intention of escalating anything. She never wanted conflict, yet the weight of what had happened pressed against her heart like a quiet reminder. She tried to push the heaviness aside, reminding herself that she had endured worse. She had walked through far colder rooms than this one. Still, the bitterness of Heather's dismissal clung to her. Her thoughts paused when she noticed footsteps approaching again. Heather reappeared. Her posture remained impeccable, shoulders squared, chin lifted slightly. She held herself the way people do when they believe they control the room. She stopped at Mr. Randall's row first, leaning in with a smile that reached her eyes. Aaliyah watched her pour another glass of wine for him, then for the woman across the aisle, adjusting the napkin with a graceful touch. Not once did she glance toward 1E. When she finally stepped in front of Aaliyah, she didn't slow down. She lifted the empty tray from a service cart and placed it onto Aaliyah's table with a soft thud, sliding the cold sandwich aside as if clearing an inconvenience. Aaliyah looked up. Her voice came out quiet but steady. Heather, could you confirm something for me? I received an email stating my keto meal was loaded for this flight. Heather's smile appeared, thin and practiced. The email may have been incorrect. It happens. These special meals get mixed up frequently. Her tone sounded almost sympathetic, yet something sharper hid beneath. A tone that suggested the problem wasn't the system, but the person asking. Aaliyah tried again, still gentle. I understand errors happen, but I did check in early. And the passenger behind me received his salmon dish a few minutes ago. For a moment, Heather's eyes flickered. A tiny flash of annoyance surfaced before smoothing into neutrality. I'm not sure what to tell you, ma'am. The system says your meal wasn't included. I can offer you extra snacks, though. Aaliyah held her gaze. Her voice remained soft, but conviction threaded through each word. It feels strange that the only meal missing is mine. Heather's smile tightened. A faint hint of discomfort passed through her expression before she regained composure. I assure you, there's nothing personal here. Just a mix-up. She stepped back quickly, as if ending the conversation before it could deepen. Her polished shoes tapped lightly against the aisle carpet as she walked away, turning toward another set of passengers with a renewed warmth that she had carefully withheld from Aaliyah. A faint rustle sounded behind her. Someone whispered again, though lower this time. The words, muffled by distance, still carried an old, familiar sting. Maybe she should just be grateful she's here at all. Aaliyah's jaw tightened. She kept her gaze on the tray. The sandwich sat alone and looking even smaller under the warm cabin lights. She didn't touch it. She didn't move it. She simply watched it like an object that held a deeper meaning. It wasn't the food. It wasn't even the mistake. It was the message behind it. She inhaled carefully. The air carried a subtle mix of citrus cleaner and the buttery scent of food served to others. The smells blended together strangely, amplifying her discomfort. She closed her eyes briefly, trying not to let the ache at the back of her throat rise. The sensation reminded her of a memory she rarely revisited, a university reception in Cambridge years ago. Students and faculty gathered around, plates filled with catered food. She stood in line behind a group of her classmates who had laughed joyfully with the professor. When she reached the table, the server suddenly said, "We're out." He didn't look at her, didn't offer alternatives. And when she stepped aside, confused, she saw the same server offer another plate to the student behind her. She remembered walking away empty-handed, fighting the same quiet sting she felt now. Even back then, she hadn't wanted conflict. She had swallowed the discomfort and convinced herself it was nothing. But she knew better now. Sometimes nothing is simply the first layer of something much deeper. The murmur of conversation filled the cabin again. Aaliyah heard cutlery clinking against plates, the soft sound of wine swirling in glasses, quiet laughter echoing from a few seats back. The world around her continued effortlessly, as though her discomfort had no place in it. She finally lifted her gaze and looked out the window. The sky had shifted into deeper shades of purple and navy. A calm canvas stretched endlessly, offering a quiet refuge in contrast to the cabin's subtle tension. Her reflection faintly appeared in the glass. Eyes thoughtful, shoulders steady. The face of a woman who had learned to stay composed even when her world was painted with small injustices. Marcus approached timidly, pausing near her row. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "Dr. Grant, is everything all right?" Aaliyah gave him a small, reassuring smile. She didn't want him to feel torn between empathy and fear. "I'm fine, Marcus." "Thank you." But Marcus hesitated. His eyes moved toward the untouched meal before returning to hers. A flicker of apology lived in his expression. Not his fault, yet he felt responsible. A sign he had seen everything. "If you need anything, please let me know." "I mean that." His sincerity softened the heaviness in her chest, even if only slightly. "Thank you," she repeated gently. After he walked away, Aaliyah looked back at her tablet. She had opened Quantum Grid earlier out of instinct, but she hadn't activated anything. Not yet. Her hand hovered over the screen. Part of her wanted to let it go, pretend it was nothing. Tell herself she was tired, and that fatigue exaggerated things. Another part of her resisted. Not because of pride, not because she wanted consequences, but because she knew that silence allowed these patterns to survive. She knew how many others before her had endured the same behavior and chosen to stay quiet. Not because they wanted to, but because speaking up always cost them more. Her thumb grazed the edge of the tablet. A memory surfaced. Her mother standing in their small kitchen years ago, stirring a pot of soup, her voice gentle yet firm. "If they try to shrink you, baby, do not make yourself smaller just to keep the peace." The tablet screen brightened under her touch. Her breath steadied. She navigated the interface carefully, her movements precise. She wasn't seeking revenge. She wasn't acting in anger. She was simply refusing to make herself small again. The Quantum Grid menu opened. Aaliyah didn't activate anything yet. She just stared at the interface, feeling the shift within herself. A shift she recognized. A shift that meant silence was no longer the answer. The glow from Aaliyah's tablet lingered on her face for several seconds before she lowered the device onto her lap. She hadn't activated any command yet. She simply let the light rest on her skin, as if giving herself permission to feel the weight of what had just happened. Sometimes the smallest indignities were the hardest to carry because they were so often ignored by others. The cabin's quiet returned, filled with polite laughter, murmured conversations, and the faint clink of utensils. Everyone around her seemed to move through the moment effortlessly, untouched by the tension simmering beneath the luxury veneer, a world moving forward as though nothing had occurred. Aaliyah folded her hands gently. She wasn't sure what unsettled her more, the incident itself, or the realization that she had grown used to incidents like this. She let the truth settle in her mind like a stone sinking to the bottom of a still pond. From across the aisle, the woman with the pearl necklace glanced toward her again. This time the look lingered an instant longer. Curious, detached, not malicious, but certainly not warm, as though Aaliyah was a puzzle piece placed in the wrong box. The plane hummed with a steady vibration. The cabin lights dimmed to a softer glow, casting long shadows along the aisle. This kind of quiet made it easier to notice shifting details, the subdued taps of a flight attendant's shoes, the rustling of a passenger adjusting their blanket, the slight creak of a leather seat leaning back. Aaliyah breathed slowly, grounding herself. She watched a bead of condensation slide down the side of a champagne flute on the tray nearby. A tiny droplet, carving its path in silence. Strange how something so small could hold her attention when everything else felt so heavy. Her thoughts drifted, uninvited, to the early years of her career, and the memory of her first conference surfaced. She had been 28, presenting a breakthrough encryption method. She remembered walking into the auditorium and being mistaken 3 times for the event photographer. Each time she'd smiled politely, though the smile cracked just a little more. When she finally took the stage, a few people froze in surprise, as though they were waiting for someone else to appear, someone who fit the mold better. She had given her presentation flawlessly, yet afterward, the only compliment she'd received from a senior executive was, "You speak so clearly," as though clarity was the surprising part, not the algorithm she had built. Another memory followed, a gala dinner in Houston. She sat beside a donor who assumed she worked in customer service until she introduced herself as the CEO. His fork paused midair, suspended like a witness to his shock. She remembered laughing politely, even though something inside her wilted a little that evening. She thought she had hardened over the years, that she had built enough armor to withstand these moments. She prided herself on moving through the world without letting bitterness shape her steps. Yet here she was, thousands of feet in the air, staring at a cold sandwich that somehow represented a lifetime of small cuts. Marcus reappeared with a stack of towels. He was folding them carefully, as if the precise edges offered a brief place for his mind to rest. Aaliyah watched the way his hands moved tense at first, then steadying as he found a rhythm. Heather's voice floated from the galley, speaking with another crew member. Aaliyah caught only fragments of words, but the tone was clear, soft, pleasant, controlled. Heather moved through this environment like she believed she belonged at the top of its invisible hierarchy. When she stepped out again, she paused near the row behind Aaliyah. Her laughter bubbled effortlessly as she complimented a passenger on his tie. She adjusted his napkin with an attentive gesture. Moments later, she passed Aaliyah without acknowledgement. The contrast stung more than the words earlier. Aaliyah lowered her eyes, letting her breathing settle again. Something inside her felt exhausted. Not because of Heather's behavior, but because she recognized the pattern too well. A pattern built from years of subtle exclusion disguised as simple oversight. Her tablet remained on her lap, open but unused. She pressed her palm lightly against the screen, as though drawing strength from the cool surface. She whispered inwardly, almost like a prayer, "You're not imagining it. This is real." The stillness helped her gather her thoughts. The plane's lights dimmed even further for cabin rest, and a hush settled across first class. The atmosphere softened at the edges, and in that softened silence her mind opened in ways she usually restrained. She found herself thinking about choices, how moments like this forced a choice between letting things slip quietly into memory, or addressing the truth with steadiness. She had spent years choosing silence for the sake of peace, but today peace felt like surrender. Her eyes drifted again to the sandwich. The faint chill rising from it seemed to cut through the warm air. Something about that simple meal unsettled her deeply. It represented everything unspoken, everything diminished, everything denied. She placed the sandwich on the far end of the tray. The motion felt symbolic, like she was pushing away the idea that she had to accept less than she deserved. Her heartbeat steadied as a new feeling settled in her chest. Not anger, not indignation. Something stronger. A sense of alignment. A clarity born from years of restraint finally reaching its threshold. She touched her tablet again. This time her finger tapped the screen with intention. The menu opened quietly, glowing faintly under the dim lights. She navigated the interface slowly, almost meditatively. Each command, each movement, felt like a step toward reclaiming her dignity. She wasn't going to create chaos. She wasn't going to raise her voice or demand anything she hadn't earned, but she would no longer let moments like this blend into the background of her life. Her fingertips brushed the option labeled Internal Behavior Audit. The illuminated button carried a sense of gravity. It was a tool she had built to ensure fairness, to protect people from patterns of bias that hid behind professional smiles. She paused, allowing one last moment of reflection. Is this the moment? A quiet voice rose inside her. Calm, mature, certain. If you do nothing, the pattern continues. Not just for you, for others too. Her chest expanded with a steady breath, and she realized she already knew the answer. She pressed the button. The tablet vibrated softly in her hands. A notification appeared. Command recorded. Awaiting confirmation. She stared at the screen for a few seconds, absorbing what she had just set in motion. The hum of the aircraft continued, unchanged. No one else knew. No one else had noticed the shift she had made. Yet something profound had moved within her. A boundary she had repaired. A line she had redrawn. She quietly confirmed the command. The screen dimmed again, leaving her with the hum of the engines and the soft glow of the cabin. She placed the tablet gently into the side pocket of her seat and leaned back, allowing her shoulders to relax for the first time since boarding. She felt a sense of stillness wash through her. Not triumph. Not relief. Something like liberation. She whispered beneath her breath, almost too softly to hear. No more shrinking. Outside her window, the sky stretched endlessly. A place without walls. A place where nothing restricted how high she could rise. The confirmation screen faded into a soft glow, leaving Aaliyah seated in a cocoon of dim light and steady engine hum. She rested her hands lightly on the armrests. The cabin felt unchanged, yet inside her something had shifted. A quiet resolve settled deeper than before, like a stone gently finding its place at the bottom of a lake. Nothing dramatic happened. No alarms. No flashing signals. The aircraft continued its path through the clouds with the same calm rhythm. Yet the moment she tapped that screen, an entire system began to listen. The audit command didn't launch anything publicly. It didn't alert the crew. It simply triggered the same mechanism used to assess internal operations service logs, timing stamps, interaction patterns, and behavioral metrics. A system she had helped design, one meant to detect silent injustices that standard protocols often ignored. She had created that tool because she knew too well how easily these things slipped through cracks. Now, she had finally used it for herself. She exhaled slowly, allowing her shoulders to settle. A sense of clarity drifted through her, steady and anchoring. Across the aisle, the woman with the pearls had begun watching a documentary on her tablet. A faint glow reflected on her jewelry. She had no idea anything had changed. No one did. Aaliyah reached for her water glass, taking a sip to ease the dryness in her throat. The coolness steadied her breath. She noticed Mr. Randall flipping through a financial magazine, oblivious to the tension that had surged silently through the cabin earlier. His fork rested on an empty plate, wiped clean. His meal had been served perfectly, while hers had been dismissed as though it never mattered. Small things, yet somehow monumental. Aaliyah closed her eyes for a moment. The inside of her mind felt clearer now, though exhaustion lingered at the edges. She allowed her thoughts to drift, not into memories this time, but into the present moment. Her heartbeat, steady, her breath, measured, her dignity, unshaken. A soft vibration buzzed at her side. Her tablet lit up. The words displayed were discreet, written in small, non-intrusive text. Data sync initiated. Reviewing crew behavior log 90 Her pulse quickened slightly, though she remained externally composed. This wasn't about punishment. It wasn't even about confrontation. It was about visibility, shining a light where avoidance often thrived. Aaliyah's eyes flicked to the aisle as Marcus walked past again. He moved more carefully now, concern lingering in his expression. He paused near her row, adjusting an overhead bin latch that didn't need adjusting. He looked like someone who wanted to speak but held himself back out of fear of being overheard. He opened his mouth slightly as though trying to gather courage. Before he could, Heather's voice echoed from the galley with an unmistakable firmness. "Marcus, can I see you for a moment?" He flinched nearly imperceptibly, then looked at Aaliyah for a heartbeat. She saw behind his eyes the hesitation of a man caught between duty and conscience. "Go ahead," she said gently. He nodded, then stepped toward the galley. Aaliyah watched the tension in his shoulders tighten again, his steps measured and slow. The galley curtain rustled as he disappeared behind it. Aaliyah lowered her gaze, listening to the faint cadence of hushed voices. She couldn't make out the words, only the rhythm of their exchange. Heather's tone clipped. Marcus's softer, defensive, the imbalance between them palpable even through the fabric. A moment later, the curtain shifted and Heather stepped back into the aisle. She smoothed the front of her uniform with calculated poise, her expression carefully restored. Marcus followed behind with lowered eyes. Aaliyah felt something twist deep in her chest. The dynamic was painfully familiar. It echoed so many workplaces where a single authority figure shaped the experience of everyone beneath them. The tablet vibrated again. Service discrepancy detected. Time differential. 18 minutes. Meal priority variance. High. Her breath caught slightly. The numbers didn't surprise her. They simply confirmed what she had already lived. She placed a hand over her heart, not pressing hard, just grounding herself with the warmth of her own palm. Her mother's voice rose again in her mind, gentle and steady. "When the world refuses to see you, you do not dim. You shine until the truth is unmistakable." The thought steadied her. For a while the cabin remained still. Aaliyah watched the sky outside, streaks of deep indigo blending into gray. The aircraft's wings sliced through the landscape of clouds, leaving no trace behind. She stared at the vastness, letting it ease the tightness in her chest. She had always loved the quiet above the world. Up here, borders disappeared. Assumptions dissolved. Nothing separated one person from another. Everything felt equal. She wished the world below could reflect that same simplicity. A soft chime echoed through the cabin. Not loud, not urgent. A standard notification indicating system activity. None of the other passengers reacted. Only the crew noticed subtle system adjustments. Heather paused mid-step, glancing instinctively toward the panel near the galley, her expression tightening almost imperceptibly. She recognized the signal. A system audit was in progress. Aaliyah watched her without saying a word. Heather straightened her posture immediately, smoothing her expression into its familiar hospitality mask. But something had shifted. The confidence in her stride dimmed slightly. The air around her felt more brittle, as though she suddenly sensed the ground beneath her was less stable. Aaliyah didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply observed with quiet stillness. She hadn't initiated anything to frighten the crew. She had done it to seek the truth. And truth had a way of unsettling even those who believed themselves untouchable. Heather passed by Aaliyah's seat again, her eyes flicking briefly toward the untouched sandwich. For the first time, her smile faltered. Not by much, but enough that Aaliyah noticed. The mask had slipped. She spoke softly, though her voice lacked its earlier warmth. Let me know if you need anything else. The sentence ended awkwardly, as though she wasn't sure what tone to use. Aaliyah nodded politely, offering nothing more. The sandwich remained untouched, a small, cold reminder of what had sparked everything. Her tablet vibrated once more. Review complete. Generating summary report. She inhaled deeply. A sense of gravity settled inside her. Not regret, not fear, just the awareness that her action carried weight. A weight she was prepared to bear. Her eyes drifted again toward Marcus. He stood near the curtain, his hands clasped in front of him. When their gazes met, he gave a tiny nod. Not gratitude, not apology, something more solemn. Recognition. He had seen what happened. He had felt the imbalance, and he saw now that someone was finally willing to confront it. Aaliyah offered a faint, steady nod in return, a quiet reassurance. She wasn't doing this for herself alone. She leaned back in her seat, letting the hum of the engines wash over her. The aircraft cut through the clouds with unwavering forward motion, carrying dozens of unaware travelers toward their destination. Only one person on board understood what had truly begun. A ripple. A shift. The first movement of a storm that didn't roar or thunder, but revealed. The cabin light shifted again, softening into a warmer glow that stretched across the first-class aisles like gentle brushstrokes. A hush followed, the kind that often settled after meals were cleared away. Passengers leaned back in their seats, some with eyes closed, others scrolling through their screens, drifting into their private worlds. Aaliyah looked down at her tablet as a new notification pulsed quietly on the display. Summary report generated. Awaiting authorization. Her pulse tightened for a brief moment, not out of fear, but out of awareness. She had reached the point where intention became action, a point few ever crossed. The decision before her wasn't about a sandwich or a rude attendant. It was about a pattern spanning years of subtle wounds she had carried in silence. She touched the edge of the tablet lightly, not yet opening the report. Instead, she breathed in the steady hum of the aircraft, allowing herself a final moment of calm. She wanted her mind clear, her heart steady, her purpose aligned. A faint rustle drew her attention. Heather had paused near the galley again, her posture rigid in a way it hadn't been earlier. She checked the panel discreetly, but her eyes darted toward the first row seats more frequently now. Pretending nothing was wrong had become more difficult. Aaliyah turned her gaze away, not out of avoidance, but out of peace. She wasn't interested in studying Heather's discomfort. What mattered was truth, and truth had already begun making its way through the system. A few rows behind, the whispering resumed. Another pair of passengers commented quietly about meal quality and service. Though their voices were low, their tone carried a familiarity that made Aaliyah's chest constrict again. None of them realized how easily their casual remarks contributed to an atmosphere that felt heavier for some than others. She leaned back, allowing her head to rest against the cushioned seat. The leather felt cool against her skin. Her breath deepened. She heard her father's voice, soft as memory. Strength isn't always loud, baby girl, and sometimes it's a whisper that refuses to fade. The vibration from the tablet returned. Another update. Behavioral pattern comparison. Ready. Press to view. She lifted the device, her hands steady now. When she opened the report, the lines of data unfolded clearly. Service delay 18 minutes. Priority conflict confirmed. Bias indicators elevated. Crew behavior inconsistent with first-class protocol. Her jaw tightened slightly. Not in anger, in recognition. Evidence didn't lie. She scrolled further. Meal confirmation verified. Passenger Grant, Aaliyah. Status recorded. Crew response denial without system check. Resolution provided none. Each line carried a quiet gravity. Proof in the language of numbers, patterns, and timestamps. Proof no one could dismiss as exaggeration. Her eyes drifted toward Marcus. He was smoothing the edge of a linen cloth when he glanced briefly in her direction. When their eyes met, a flicker of something passed between them. Not fear, not pity. Something that resembled a shared understanding. He lowered his gaze, but she could see relief settling into his shoulders, as if her presence offered a small shield against the tensions he lived with. Aaliyah returned her attention to the tablet and clicked the final tab. Submit report to Liberty Air Oversight. A line of text appeared beneath it. This action will notify the airline's executive ethics system and initiate standard review upon landing. Her hand hovered above the screen for a lingering second. Was she certain she closed her eyes? A younger version of herself flickered in memory. Sitting in a science fair auditorium while judges praised a boy beside her for an invention she knew wasn't mathematically sound. She remembered raising her hand to correct him and the look on their faces. Surprised, skeptical, dismissive. She had lowered her hand then. She didn't lower it now. Her thumb pressed the button gently. Submission confirmed. Review scheduled. Immediately upon arrival, Aaliyah let her breath flow out in a slow stream. Not sharp, not forceful, just steady. She hadn't done this out of anger or pride. She had done it because dignity mattered, because staying silent chipped away at the soul little by little, and because she could no longer accept the notion that she should endure quietly simply to be seen as graceful. The screen dimmed, folding the moment into stillness. A few seconds later, the cabin intercom clicked softly. A routine chime. But Heather stiffened, turning her head slightly toward the galley panel. She walked back briskly and pretended to check supplies, though her eyes kept flicking to the small, blinking indicator near the top corner. She recognized the signal again. Internal review in progress. Aaliyah felt no satisfaction in watching her reaction. She didn't look away out of triumph, but out of clarity. Her goal wasn't to frighten anyone. Her goal was to illuminate something that had been hidden too long. She reached for her water once more, taking a slow sip. The cool liquid eased the dryness in her throat, grounding her again. A gentle voice came from behind. "Excuse me, Dr. Grant." Aaliyah turned slightly. An older woman with silver braids leaned forward from the second row. Her expression held softness, but something worried lingered in her eyes. "I hope you're being taken care of," she said quietly. Aaliyah's heart softened. Her reply came out warm and composed. "I'm all right. Thank you for asking." The woman nodded once, as though relieved but still aware of the truth beneath the surface. She leaned back into her seat again. Moments like that always found her unexpectedly. Strangers who sensed imbalance, strangers who felt compelled to check in, not because they knew her story, but because they recognized the silence that followed certain wounds. She let her gaze drift toward the window once more. The horizon stretched endlessly, a layered tapestry of deep blue and pale silver. The clouds looked almost still, like frozen waves in an untouched landscape. The peace outside contrasted the subtle unraveling within the cabin. Aaliyah placed both hands calmly over her lap. She could feel her pulse settling again. The first ripple had been set. Quiet. Precise. Unmistakable. She didn't know what awaited her upon landing. She didn't imagine anyone being pulled aside or questioned the moment the doors opened. Reviews took time. Systems moved carefully. But she knew one truth. Silence no longer protected the wrong people. The hum of the aircraft deepened as the engines adjusted slightly. Aaliyah allowed her eyes to close, trusting this small pocket of stillness. Her mother's voice returned once more, gentle as always. "You do not have to shout to be heard," she whispered back, so soft no one else could hear. "I know." In a quiet corner of Washington, D.C., far from the steady hush of the aircraft carrying Aaliyah across the continent, a different kind of silence lived inside a glass-walled office. The building was mostly dark except for a single floor, where pale light spilled across rows of empty desks. Inside that pool of light sat Maya Ellis, Chief Security Architect of Grant Intelligence Systems. Her hair was tied back loosely, a few strands falling against her cheek as she leaned over her monitor. The glow from the screen illuminated her face, revealing both sharp focus and a hint of exhaustion. She rarely stayed in the office this late. but a soft chime on her phone during dinner had pulled her back in. The message was brief. Quantum Grid Behavior Review triggered by user AG801. She didn't need to decode the ID. She knew exactly who it belonged to. Aaliyah had activated the system. Maya sat up straighter, her pulse quickening slightly. When Aaliyah made a move, it was never impulsive, never emotional, always measured, always necessary. She pulled the chair closer and logged into the secure console. The screen opened with a soft flicker, revealing cascading lines of data. Flight 908, crew roster, service timestamps, interaction logs, priority discrepancies. She scanned each category with meticulous precision, her eyes narrowing as more details unfolded. The system flagged multiple irregularities even before she dug deeper. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up comparative behavior charts. The graphs formed quickly, lines dipping and rising like a haunting melody. Service response for Dr. Grant lagged significantly behind the average for the cabin. Meal entries showed clear confirmation of her request. The assistant notes confirmed that her dietary order was loaded onto the aircraft. Yet her plate had never been served. Maya blew out a slow breath, allowing the truth to settle. It wasn't the first time she had seen patterns like this while analyzing partner company data, but seeing it directed toward Aaliyah created a different ache inside her. She reached for her mug, only to find it empty. Her fingers curled around the handle anyway, drawing a sense of grounding from the warmth that had once lived there. She whispered softly, as if speaking to no one and everyone, "They never learn." For a moment, she leaned back, letting her mind drift to her first interview with Aaliyah years earlier. She remembered walking into the room with a polished resume but heavy uncertainty in her chest. She had expected questions about technical mastery and system theory. Instead, Aaliyah had asked her something completely unexpected. How do you decide when to speak up and when to step back? The question had stunned her. Not because she didn't know the answer, but because she had never been asked it in a professional setting. She had responded with honesty, "You speak when silence becomes a cost." Aaliyah had smiled, that calm, knowing smile she carried like a quiet crown. "Then we'll work well together." Now, watching the data unfold on her screen, Maya felt that truth again. Silence had become a cost, and Aaliyah had chosen to speak through the precision of code, not confrontation. She returned her attention to the report, a new section blinking softly at the bottom. Crew conversation analysis available for review. She hesitated. Pulling any audio logs would require deeper justification, but the flag indicated high relevance. She tapped the icon. A transcription line appeared. Passenger 1A special meal not loaded. Extend snack options, passenger behind 1A. Some people expect too much. Small words, yet heavy with implication. Maya felt a sting of anger, sharp yet controlled. She turned the audio off immediately. She didn't need to hear the tone to understand the message. Her jaw tightened as she spoke into the quiet room. They don't see her at all. She scanned further, eyes sharp as she followed the trail of evidence. The system's evaluation score climbed higher through the night. Bias indicator significant. Inconsistency confirmed. Supervisor response none. Likelihood of systemic pattern high. She knew where this was heading. Her professional instincts aligned with her personal conviction. This wasn't a minor incident. This was a cultural crack. She opened the secure communication panel and typed directly into the encrypted channel for Liberty Air's Executive Ethics Division. "This is Maya Ellis, Chief Security Architect at Grant Intelligence Systems. Behavior review triggered flight. 908 primary concern service discrimination pattern detected. Action recommended immediate preliminary review upon landing. Severity classification level 3. Note this submission is triggered by CEO level user. Proceed with full compliance." She pressed send without hesitation. The message vanished into the secure tunnel. A quiet hum filled her ears as she leaned back again, letting the tension unwind slowly. She knew this action would cascade, not instantly, not loudly, but inevitably. Her phone buzzed again on the desk. A second notification. Quantum grid field request confirmed. User AG01 awaiting downstream acknowledgement. Maya sighed softly. She knew Aaliyah was somewhere above the clouds, alone in her seat, facing something she shouldn't have had to face. The thought tightened something inside her chest. She whispered into the stillness of the office. You're not alone. I see you. I'm here. Moments passed while she watched the screen. The graph stabilized, the logs updated. Everything was now in motion. She rubbed her eyes gently. The ache behind them deepened, but she didn't mind. This was the kind of work that mattered. Not the algorithms, not the contracts, not the accolades. This ensuring the world didn't stay quiet when it witnessed something wrong. Her phone buzzed again. A brief message from Aaliyah's encrypted channel. Only 3 words. Thank you. Maya. Maya closed her eyes. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. She typed a reply with hands steadier than her heart. Always. She shut her laptop slowly, letting the screen fade to black. The room darkened again except for the soft light above her desk. She gathered her coat but lingered for one final moment, breathing in the quiet. Tonight she had not just done her job, she had honored something deeper. Respect, truth, dignity, values Aaliyah lived by, values she herself believed in. She walked toward the elevator, the faint echo of her footsteps following her down the hallway. The world outside remained dark and still, unaware of the storm that had just been quietly set in motion. But Maya knew. And she knew Aaliyah knew too. A storm didn't need thunder to be real. Sometimes it only needed one woman refusing to disappear. Aaliyah opened her eyes to the faint vibration beneath her feet. It was subtle, almost like a change in breath rather than a change in altitude. But she sensed it instantly. She had spent enough of her life in the air to recognize the first stirrings of descent. The cabin lights brightened slightly, soft halos blooming across the polished surfaces. The shift signaled movement, progress, transition. It felt fitting. Her tablet rested in the side pocket, screen dimmed yet holding everything she had set in motion. The knowledge of that settled inside her like a quiet ember, warm but steady. She straightened in her seat, rolling her shoulders gently to release tension. The air around her carried a different tone now. Not lighter, not heavier, just changed. Subtle currents of awareness threaded through the space, unspoken but present. She saw it first in Heather. The lead attendant moved with the same practiced elegance, yet her stride no longer held its earlier ease. Her eyes flicked to the galley monitor repeatedly, and each glance chipped away at her confidence. She adjusted napkins with unnecessary precision, checked glassware twice, then smoothed her hair even though it was already immaculate. A woman rearranged by anxiety. Aaliyah watched without judgment. She wasn't interested in humiliating anyone. She wasn't hoping for fear. What she hoped for was realization, reflection, accountability. Those things often required the ground beneath a person to shift. From a few seats behind, a passenger yawned loudly, stretching his arms across the aisle. He reached for his water while murmuring something to his travel partner. Just another traveler nearing the end of a long journey, unaware of the undercurrent running through the aircraft. Aaliyah looked toward the window. The clouds outside had thinned, revealing glimpses of the world below. Patches of land appeared through breaks in the mist, dark shapes against a pale canvas. Lights scattered across towns and highways flickered like tiny stars. She let her thoughts drift, not into memory this time, but into a quiet space between clarity and anticipation. Aaliyah Grant had always lived with a dual awareness. In every room she entered, she carried her achievements and her identity, both remarkable, both visible. Yet too often, only one was acknowledged. Her mother used to say, "They will try to define you before they understand you. Let your truth do the teaching." Tonight, her truth had spoken through data and dignity. The intercom crackled gently. A calm, measured voice followed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into Seattle. Please remain seated for a few minutes as we prepare for landing. Aaliyah drew a slow breath. The words echoed through the cabin like a quiet countdown. She reached for her water again, taking a sip that cooled the warm knot in her throat. Her eyes drifted toward Marcus, who stood near the aisle, securing carts and checking latches. His movements remained careful, but something in his posture had changed. The tightness across his shoulders had softened. He approached her row briefly, his voice a low whisper meant only for her. If you need anything before landing, I'm here. Aaliyah's expression warmed with a quiet gratitude. Thank you, Marcus. Truly. He nodded once, a gesture filled with sincerity rather than protocol, then stepped back toward the galley. Behind him. The curtain shifted. Heather emerged again. Her professional smile was still present, but thinner now, fragile at the edges. She paused at Aaliyah's seat, forcing her tone into its usual warmth. Is there anything else I can help you with before we land? Aaliyah met her gaze calmly. No anger, no coldness, just clarity. No, thank you. Heather waited as though expecting more. Apology? Confrontation. Something to define the moment. But Aaliyah offered nothing. Silence was not a shield now. It was truth. Heather stepped away quietly. Aaliyah turned back toward the window as the clouds began to peel away. The earth below grew closer, slowly revealing a coastline defined by gentle curves and dark water. She watched the view with the kind of introspective calm one felt when witnessing an ending that carried the promise of a beginning. Her tablet vibrated softly in the pocket beside her. She retrieved it. Incoming notification. Liberty Air Ethics Division acknowledges preliminary review. Team prepared on site upon landing. Aaliyah closed the screen. She didn't smile. She didn't exhale in victory. She simply felt a subtle loosening near her ribs, an emotional tension quietly unwinding. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered. A small movement caught her attention. The older woman with the silver braids leaned forward slightly, enough to meet Aaliyah's gaze with gentle curiosity. You all right, dear? The simple kindness pressed unexpectedly into Aaliyah's chest. She offered a reassuring nod. I'm all right. Thank you for checking on me. The woman smiled, her eyes warm and knowing, then sat back again. That warmth lingered. It reminded Aaliyah that for every dismissive glance she encountered, there were also those who offered quiet support. People who saw her humanity before anything else. Aaliyah rested her head briefly against the cushioned seat. The hum of the engines deepened as the aircraft's angle shifted again. She watched the city lights draw nearer, spreading across the land like veins of gold. Her thoughts drifted back to Maya. She could imagine her in the Washington office, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly undone from focus, face illuminated by the soft glow of monitors. Maya always carried more loyalty than words. Aaliyah felt a wave of gratitude wash through her. A notification chimed on her phone. From Maya landing will go smoothly. I've prepared everything. I'm with you. Aaliyah's lips curved faintly. There was comfort in knowing she was not walking into the next chapter alone. She placed the phone beside her and smoothed her navy blazer gently. The gesture helped center her. She felt presence return to her body. Breath settling, posture aligning. The aircraft dipped lower. Aaliyah could see the harbor now, its waters reflecting shimmering trails from distant lights. She traced the patterns with her eyes, letting them lead her toward a quiet resolve. She whispered a few words only she could hear. You belong everywhere your truth can breathe. The landing gear unlocked beneath her with a muffled thud. The descent deepened. The ground rose steadily. Aaliyah closed her eyes for a brief moment, feeling both the weight of the journey behind her and the clarity of what lay ahead. Justice wasn't loud. Dignity wasn't dramatic. Truth didn't need permission. The aircraft drew closer to the runway, the lights growing brighter, guiding her toward a moment she had not sought but would face with unwavering grace. The wheels met the runway with a muted rumble, a sound that rolled through the cabin like a slow heartbeat. Aaliyah felt the familiar pull in her chest as the aircraft eased into the long stretch of braking. Lights swept past the windows in streaks of gold and blue, each reflection trembling across the glass. As the plane slowed, a quiet ripple moved through the passengers. People shifted in their seats, adjusting jackets, stretching stiff shoulders, gathering scattered items. A subtle buzz replaced the hush, yet beneath it all lived something more delicate anticipation. Aaliyah remained still for a moment longer. She let the vibration settle, listening to the hum fade as the aircraft turned toward its gate. Seattle's airport glowed beyond the window, halos of light suspended against the deep ink of the sky. She reached for her bag, checking that her tablet was secured in the side pocket. Her movements were slow, deliberate. Everything about the approaching moment required steadiness, and she welcomed it. She had not chosen this path lightly. She had stepped onto it with clarity. The intercom clicked once more. "Welcome to Seattle, for your safety. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off. We thank you for flying with us." Heather's voice carried its usual professional tone, though a slight tremor lived beneath it. Her control had cracks now, small but visible to anyone who knew how to listen. Aaliyah looked toward the galley. Heather stood rigid, hands clasped tightly behind her back. She stared at the service panel with a tightness in her jaw she hadn't shown earlier. The blinking indicator remained lit in the corner of the display. She understood what it meant. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Aaliyah pulled her strap away gently. A murmur filled the cabin as passengers rose, reaching for overhead bins. Luggage shifted with soft thumps. Someone laughed lightly at a joke. Another tapped out a message to a loved one. Life moved as usual, unaware of the gravity gathering quietly at the gate. Aaliyah stood, adjusting her blazer. Her breathing stayed measured. Calm settled across her shoulders like a shawl woven from resolve. Marcus approached with tentative steps. His eyes held a question he didn't dare speak. She offered him a reassuring nod. He exhaled softly, relief loosening the tension in his posture. "If you need help with your bag, I'd be happy to assist," he said quietly. "Thank you, Marcus, but I've got it," she replied gently. He dipped his head, a gesture filled with respect rather than formality. Then he stepped back as Heather approached, for a moment. Heather lingered at the front of the cabin, her eyes flickering across the passengers. When she reached Aaliyah's row, she hesitated, her voice slightly strained. "Thank you for flying with us, Dr. Grant." The words were correct, polished, yet they carried the weighted air of someone trying to reassemble authority that had slipped through their grasp. Aaliyah responded with a calm that held no malice. "Wishing you a good evening, Heather." Heather's eyes wavered, uncertain. Something in Aaliyah's tone told her she was not being dismissed, but seen, truly seen, and that was far more unsettling than confrontation. Passengers began filing down the aisle. As they passed, the older woman with silver braids paused at Aaliyah's shoulder. "Take care of yourself, dear," she said softly. Aaliyah felt her heart warm. "Thank you. You too." The woman squeezed her hand gently before moving on. Aaliyah waited until the aisle cleared enough for her to step forward. She walked with quiet grace, her heels touching the floor in unhurried rhythm. No rush, no fear, only presence. The cabin door opened. A wash of cool air brushed across her face, carrying with it the faint scent of jet fuel and evening chill. But there was something else, a stillness that vibrated slightly, like the moment before a curtain lifts. She stepped into the jet bridge. At the far end, beneath the glow of overhead lights, stood 3 individuals in formal uniforms. 2 wore Liberty Air executive badges. The third bore the insignia of the airline's ethics division. Their posture was straight, their expressions solemn. They weren't here for her. They were here because of what the system had revealed. As Aaliyah approached, the tall man in the center stepped forward. His voice carried a low, steady tone. "Dr. Grant, welcome to Seattle. We appreciate your cooperation as we review an urgent matter regarding your flight." Aaliyah inclined her head politely. She felt no triumph, only clarity. Behind her, steps echoed. Heather appeared at the doorway of the aircraft, her face pale beneath the cabin lights. Marcus followed, uncertainty in his eyes. The rest of the crew trickled out slowly, each one pausing when they saw the executives waiting. A ripple of awareness passed through them. The lead executive turned to the crew. His voice remained calm but firm. "We'll need to speak with all of you. Please step to the side for a preliminary briefing." Heather's voice cracked slightly as she attempted composure. "Is there a problem?" The executive met her gaze evenly. "There is a formal review in progress. We'll discuss the details shortly." Heather swallowed hard. Her polished professionalism fractured. She looked at Aaliyah then, not with hostility or defiance, but with something closer to dread, a realization dawning too late. Aaliyah did not return the stare. She offered only neutrality. Her role now was not to gloat. It was to stand firm in the truth she had carried for years. Marcus stepped aside, posture composed despite the uncertainty around him. Their eyes met briefly. Aaliyah offered a soft, grounding nod. He exhaled quietly, the tension in his shoulders easing. The executive turned back to Aaliyah. "Thank you again for your patience. Transportation is arranged to take you wherever you need to go. If you require a statement for your records, we can provide it." "I appreciate that," she replied softly. "Would you like an escort to the arrivals lane?" "I'll be all right, thank you." He nodded respectfully and stepped away to address the crew. Aaliyah moved forward, leaving the murmurs behind her. She walked down the jet bridge with unhurried steps, her mind quiet. Every inhale felt clear, every exhale carried release. When she reached the terminal entrance, a soft chime sounded on her phone. A message from Maya. "I'm here. Gate B12. Take your time." Aaliyah felt warmth bloom behind her ribs. Knowing Maya was close steadied her even further. She walked into the terminal, her silhouette steady beneath the wide, domed ceiling. Travelers bustled around her, their lives intersecting with hers only for a breath before rushing on. She carried herself with the fullness of someone who had chosen truth over silence, dignity over comfort, clarity over avoidance. A woman who had spent a lifetime shrinking so others would not feel small. A woman who no longer needed to shrink at all. The terminal stretched out before Aaliyah like a long glass river. Light shimmered across its surface, reflecting muted blues and soft gold that drifted along the polished floor. She walked at a measured pace, her suitcase rolling quietly behind her. Each step felt grounded, almost meditative, as if the weight she carried had begun to ease, grain by grain, simply by being acknowledged. Travelers brushed past her, some in hurried strides, others moving casually with the relaxed air of people who had just returned home. Their voices blended into a low hum. None of them knew what had taken place on Flight 982. None of them sensed the subtle shift still hanging in the air, the aftertaste of something momentous. She paused near a wide pane of glass overlooking the tarmac. Beyond it, aircraft lights blinked steadily against the deep sky. She watched one jet lift from the runway, its nose rising, its body tilting upward with smooth certainty. For a moment, the image stirred something inside her, a gentle reminder that ascent always required resistance first. Her phone vibrated once more. "Maya, I'm still at B12. No rush." "You good," Aaliyah typed a simple reply. "Yes?" She slipped the phone back into her coat pocket. Her breath settled into a steady rhythm. The air around her felt cool and crisp. A voice rose behind her, faint at first, then clearer. "Dr. Grant." She turned slightly. A woman in a Navy business suit walked toward her with controlled steps. She wasn't part of the airline crew. There was no badge, no logo. Instead, she carried a certain quiet authority in her posture, the kind honed through years of corporate corridors. "I'm sorry to approach you without introduction. My name is Caroline Hodge. I work with the Liberty Air legal team." Aaliyah regarded her calmly. Caroline continued, her expression smooth but earnest. I wanted to let you know that our executive office has begun the preliminary review. The formal process will continue through the night. We know this situation wasn't handled properly. We're taking it seriously." Aaliyah nodded gently. She chose her words carefully, letting them settle rather than swing like a blade. "I hope the process looks beyond this flight. What happened wasn't isolated to a meal or a moment. It's a pattern. It has history." Caroline's eyes lowered for half a breath, a sign she understood more than she admitted. "I agree," she said quietly. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen similar issues surface before, only to be brushed aside. But tonight, something had shifted beyond her influence. "We'll be in contact with you," Caroline added. "And for whatever it's worth, thank you for how you handled things. Some passengers would have made a scene." "You didn't." Aaliyah offered a faint, almost wistful smile. Sometimes silence speaks louder than shouting. Caroline exhaled softly. "Safe travels." "Dr. Grant?" She stepped away, leaving Aaliyah with her reflection in the glass. The glimpse she saw there wasn't of power or triumph. It was of endurance, of someone who had carried the weight of countless similar moments and had finally chosen to set that weight down where the world could see it. Aaliyah continued walking. As she turned the corner, she spotted Maya before the young woman saw her. Maya stood near a wide column, tapping her foot lightly while maintaining a focused look on her phone. Her curls framed her face, and the glow from the overhead lights softened her features. Aaliyah approached, and Maya's head lifted immediately. Relief lit her expression. "There you are." Aaliyah allowed the smallest hint of a smile. "Here I am." Maya reached for her suitcase automatically. "Let me get that. I can manage," Aaliyah replied, though her tone carried warmth rather than refusal. Maya lowered the handle but stayed close, matching Aaliyah's pace as they began walking toward the exit. "You held up," Maya said gently. Aaliyah let out a slow breath. "I had to. That's not what I meant. I mean, you held yourself with so much grace, more than most people could, more than anyone should be asked to." Aaliyah looked ahead, her voice soft. "Grace isn't always a choice. Sometimes it's the only option we're allowed." Maya nodded. She didn't push further. They reached the escalator. As they stepped onto it, descending toward baggage claim, a brief hush enveloped them. Aaliyah felt her mind drift, unspooling layers of thought she had pushed aside earlier. She replayed the cold sandwich, the dismissive voice, the hollow excuse. The years of familiarity wrapped inside one moment, the quiet resistance that had grown inside her chest like a steady flame. Part of her wondered if she had done too much, if pressing the audit protocol would paint her as vindictive, if people would say she had overreacted. Another part of her pushed back, firm and unwavering. No one should have to earn basic respect. Not her. Not anyone. The escalator reached the lower level. The heavy scent of rolling suitcases and polished floors filled the air. Announcements echoed through the terminal. They entered a calmer stretch of corridor where fewer people stood. The overhead lights cast elongated shadows beneath their feet. Maya spoke quietly. "You know, when you didn't respond to my earlier message right away, I worried. Not because I thought you couldn't handle it. I know how these things can feel, even when you stay composed." Aaliyah carried her gaze forward. "It doesn't get easier. No matter how many degrees, titles, boardrooms, it finds you again, wearing a different uniform." Maya's eyes softened. "But you didn't let it define you tonight." Aaliyah allowed the faintest nod. "I won't let it become the narrative. Not for me. Not for the crew members who deserve better. Not for any passenger who's been made to shrink to fit someone else's comfort." Maya stepped closer, her voice a whisper meant for her alone. "You're stronger than you know." Aaliyah looked at her, gratitude flickering behind her calm exterior. "Thank you." They walked toward the exit where the cool air drifted through the partially opened doors. Outside, rideshare lights flashed intermittently. A suitcase wheel squeaked nearby as a family hurried past. Aaliyah slowed. "Before we head out," she said softly, "I want to sit somewhere for a moment. Just a little space before we leave the airport." Maya nodded. Of course, they found a bench near a quiet corner. The overhead screen displayed departure times for flights headed to distant cities. Blue light flickered across the tiled floor. Aaliyah sat down, resting her hands on her lap. The stillness wrapped around her. She inhaled deeply, letting the breath fill the places inside her that had tightened throughout the flight. Maya sat beside her, close enough to be supportive without crowding her. After a few moments, Aaliyah spoke. "When I pressed that command, it wasn't about punishing anyone. I wasn't looking for revenge." "I know you weren't," Maya whispered. Aaliyah's voice remained steady, though it carried the strain of old wounds resurfacing. "It was about making sure the next woman who looks like me doesn't have to justify her presence in a seat she paid for, or defend her worth in a place she belongs." A hush lingered between them. Maya placed a hand lightly over hers. "You did the right thing." Aaliyah lifted her gaze toward the wide window facing the runway. Another plane glided upward, lights glimmering against the sky. Maybe... She paused. Maybe doing the right thing is finally choosing not to carry someone else's bias quietly. They sat in that space for a long moment, letting the weight disperse. Then Maya rose gently. Ready, Aaliyah nodded. Rising with her? "Yes, let's go." And together, they walked toward the sliding doors, stepping out into the calm night, where accountability had begun to unfold behind them, and something steadier waited ahead. The sliding doors opened with a soft breath, releasing Aaliyah and Maya into the cool Seattle air. A hush lingered outside the terminal, broken only by the muffled roll of suitcases and the gentle rumble of distant traffic. The sky held a calmness that contrasted sharply with everything unraveling inside Liberty Air's offices. Aaliyah paused on the sidewalk. For a moment she simply stood, letting the air settle across her skin. Maya watched her with patient understanding, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat, eyes tracing the quiet strength in Aaliyah's posture. A black sedan pulled up along the curb. The driver stepped out and opened the back door with a respectful nod. Before getting in, Aaliyah took one last look at the terminal behind her. The glass facade reflected the soft light, hiding the unfolding commotion within its walls. She knew the airline wasn't sleeping tonight. She slid into the back seat. Maya joined her, closing the door gently. The interior smelled faintly of leather and cedar, warm and steadying, and as the car began moving, city lights spilled across their faces in soft patterns. For several minutes, neither spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was the kind that gave space for the heart to settle after being stretched too thin. Maya finally broke it with a quiet question. "How are you holding up?" Aaliyah let her gaze drift toward the window where buildings flickered past like slow-moving stars. "I'm steady," she said softly. "Tired, but steady?" Maya nodded. "That's enough for tonight." Aaliyah's lips curved in a small, thoughtful smile. "Steady is all I can offer right now." The car continued toward downtown, passing through long lanes of evergreens, their silhouettes swaying gently. The world outside felt far removed from the turbulence that had unfolded in the sky. Yet the weight of it still pressed lightly against her chest. A soft chime sounded from her phone. Maya glanced at her. Something happened. Aaliyah opened the message. A single line from Mr. Randall, the executive who had greeted her at the jet bridge. Initial crew interviews underway. Additional evidence being reviewed. You will receive a formal update within hours. Aaliyah lowered the phone into her lap. "It's beginning," she murmured. Maya leaned back into her seat. "They're moving fast. Faster than I expected. They have to." Aaliyah replied. "The system they built became the mirror they avoided for too long." Another message arrived almost immediately. This time from an unknown number linked to the airline's ethics division. Follow-up inquiry pending. Additional passenger statements requested. Thank you for your cooperation. Dr. Grant? She didn't respond. She rested the phone beside her, folding her hands gently. It's strange, she said after a pause. You spend years swallowing things like this. You convince yourself it's easier not to react, not to make it bigger. You make peace with staying silent because the world keeps telling you it's the dignified thing to do. She exhaled slowly. Tonight felt different. I didn't want silence to be the only choice anymore. Maya listened with a depth that didn't require words. The car crossed a bridge, its reflection glimmering on the water below. Light rippled across the surface like drifting threads of silver. Aaliyah watched it, letting the view soften the sharp edges left inside her. What do you think they're doing right now? Maya asked quietly. Aaliyah's eyes remained on the window. Reviewing camera logs, comparing service records, reading the audit trail, probably arguing over protocol. And Heather. She hesitated, choosing her words. Heather is realizing this wasn't a simple passenger complaint. She's understanding that the patterns she thought were invisible finally caught up with her. Maya bit her lip. Do you feel bad for her? Aaliyah closed her eyes for a moment. I feel for anyone who becomes a product of a broken system. But feeling empathy doesn't mean excusing harm. People can carry their own wounds and still wound others. And what she did wasn't accidental. The car slowed as it entered the central district, where buildings rose tall and quiet. Yellow lights glowed from apartment balconies. Aaliyah saw a couple walking their dog along the sidewalk, heads leaning close as they spoke softly. A fleeting image of normal life drifting peacefully by. The driver turned onto a quieter street lined with small trees. When the car finally stopped in front of Aaliyah's hotel, she felt a subtle heaviness settle into her limbs, the kind that arrives when adrenaline begins to fade. She stepped out. Maya followed closely. Inside the lobby, warm light filled the space. The receptionist greeted them kindly, but Aaliyah barely registered the words. Her mind felt wrapped in a quiet haze, still replaying everything she had held together on the flight. In the elevator, the faint hum settled into their bones. Maya glanced sideways. There's something on your mind. Aaliyah rested her hand against the railing. Not something. Many things. I keep thinking about the other passengers who experienced this before, the ones who brushed it off, the ones who complained but were dismissed, the ones who didn't have the tools or confidence to speak up. Her voice softened. I'm not the first. I just became the one people paid attention to. Maya's expression grew solemn. That's why this matters so much. Aaliyah nodded. Change needs weight behind it. Maybe tonight was that weight. The elevator doors opened. They walked down the plush corridor until they reached her room. Aaliyah paused with the key card in her hand, suddenly aware of a small tremor in her fingers. She steadied them. You don't have to be strong every second, Maya said gently. Aaliyah inhaled deeply. I know. It's been a long journey to this moment. Longer than one flight. Maya stepped closer. Get some rest. I'll be next door if you need anything. We'll face whatever comes tomorrow together. Aaliyah met her eyes. A soft warmth bloomed inside her chest, easing the tightness she hadn't fully acknowledged until now. Thank you, Maya. Always. Aaliyah entered her room. The quiet enveloped her immediately. She set her suitcase aside and walked toward the window. Seattle's skyline shimmered beneath the endless stretch of night. Cars moved like tiny sparks across the distant roads. She placed her hand against the cool glass. How many times had she been in this position, coming down from a moment where dignity was tested, where her worth had been questioned by someone who didn't understand the history she carried? But tonight was different. Tonight, the world didn't move on without noticing. Her phone chimed again. Another message. From the airline's CEO, we are requesting a direct conversation with you tomorrow. Thank you for your strength and patience. Aaliyah set the phone down gently on the table. She sank onto the armchair nearby, leaning her head back as a deep, slow breath finally escaped her. For the first time since the confrontation in the sky, she let the exhaustion wash through her, not as defeat, but as release. She whispered to herself, almost like a quiet promise. This is just the beginning. The muted hush inside Aaliyah's hotel room carried the weight of an unfinished chapter. She had rested only briefly. Rest, in moments like this, never quite felt like softness. It felt more like gathering breath before a climb. She sat at the small table near the window, a glass of water untouched beside her, watching faint clouds drift across the skyline. Her phone buzzed once. Maya's message appeared. Breakfast downstairs if you're up for it. We have time before the call. Aaliyah closed the screen gently, letting her thumb rest against the edge of the phone for a moment longer. She rose, smoothing her blazer with quiet movements, and stepped into the hallway. Maya was already waiting near the elevators, a calm presence in a charcoal blouse and black slacks. Her expression softened when she saw Aaliyah. You look steadier, Maya said. Aaliyah returned a soft glance. I'm getting there. They walked together to the dining area, choosing a quiet corner near large windows where soft light illuminated the space. The room was peaceful, humming with the gentle clink of silverware and faint conversations. Maya poured tea for both of them, her hands steady. You slept, Maya asked. Some? The answer was honest. Neither complaint nor pretense. And you, Aaliyah, asked in return? Barely, Maya admitted with a faint smile. I kept thinking about what might happen today. Aaliyah lifted her cup, inhaling the gentle warmth that rose from it. Whatever happens, we'll handle it, she said. That part hasn't changed. Maya nodded. Her eyes reflected concern, but also trust. They shared a quiet meal, speaking in fragments. Not everything needed words. Afterward, they returned to Aaliyah's room in time for the scheduled video call. The airline's CEO, Franklin Shaw, had requested the meeting. A man known for discipline, impeccable strategy, and a reputation for steering the company through several corporate storms. Aaliyah sat before her laptop with a composed stillness. Maya took a seat beside her, slightly angled but close enough to be a quiet anchor. At precisely the scheduled minute, the screen lit up. Franklin Shaw appeared in a well-lit office, wearing a crisp white shirt. His expression was serious, but not defensive. There was a gravity in his eyes that hinted he had already reviewed far more than anyone expected. Dr. Grant, he began. Thank you for agreeing to speak with us. Good morning, Mr. Shaw. And Ms. Ellis? Shaw added politely. Maya nodded in acknowledgement. A brief pause followed, the kind that precedes something important. Shaw clasped his hands on the desk in front of him. We have conducted an overnight review of Flight 982, including service patterns, crew history, and camera footage. I want to speak plainly. What occurred was unacceptable. Aaliyah didn't respond immediately. She wanted honesty, not theatrics. Shaw continued. We found multiple service discrepancies involving Ms. Coleman, incidents consistent with what you experienced, and patterns, subtle but real, affecting passengers of specific backgrounds. This wasn't a singular lapse, it was systemic neglect. Aaliyah listened, steady but aware of an old ache shifting beneath her ribs. Hearing the truth spoken aloud carried its own kind of pain. Thank you for reviewing it thoroughly, she said. But I hope the focus is broader than one crew member. What happened came from more than personal bias. Shaw leaned forward. We know. Which is why the board has approved a full cultural audit spanning 2 years of flight records and service logs. We will also suspend the entire crew of Flight 982 pending final review. Maya's gaze flickered, absorbing the magnitude of that decision. Shaw continued, his tone unwavering. Our system failed you. And it failed every passenger who ever had a similar experience but lacked the visibility or leverage to be heard. For that, I want to personally apologize. Silence settled through the room. Aaliyah let his words rest for a moment, not out of hesitation, but out of respect for their weight. I appreciate the acknowledgement, she said quietly, but apology is the beginning, not the resolution. Shaw nodded. Agreed. Which leads to the next matter? We would like your guidance. Aaliyah lifted her eyes, meeting his directly through the screen. Guidance in what capacity Shaw inhaled, choosing his words carefully. We want to design a new ethics framework for our service teams. Clearer training, stronger accountability, and an internal monitoring system designed to surface bias before it takes root. We want someone who understands the experience, someone who knows how systems fail. We'd like you to be that voice. Maya looked at Aaliyah with a subtle spark of recognition. This was more than an offer. It was an unexpected turning point. Aaliyah folded her hands loosely. I'm not interested in being a symbolic figure, she said gently. If I help, it has to be meaningful, not performative. Shaw nodded slowly. That's precisely why we're asking. She let the silence settle again, listening to her own heartbeat beneath the calm exterior. I'll consider it, she said. But my decision depends on how committed your team is to long-term change. Not temporary optics. You have my word, Shaw said, and the board's... Aaliyah exhaled, her composure rich with quiet strength. Very well. Keep me updated on the investigation's progress. Of course, before ending the call, Shaw added something unexpected. Dr. Grant, your restraint during the incident spoke more powerfully than any escalation. Not many people possess that kind of discipline. Aaliyah held his gaze. Restraint isn't always elegance, Mr. Shaw. Sometimes it's survival. His expression shifted, as though absorbing a truth he had never fully understood. The call ended. The room felt still. Maya turned to her. What are you thinking? Aaliyah leaned back slightly, mind weaving through a tangle of emotions. I'm thinking about the women who told similar stories in private groups, the men who chose silence to protect their careers, the passengers who never received confirmation that what they felt was real. I'm thinking about how many moments like this one went unnoticed. Maya's voice softened. And now this one won't. Aaliyah nodded. No, it won't. She stood, walking back toward the window. The city lay below in shifting patterns of light. A hint of warmth rose through her chest, not triumphant, but steady. You know, she said quietly. I didn't expect anything when I boarded that plane. I just wanted to get home. But something in me reached a breaking point up there. Maya stepped beside her. Sometimes change begins with someone who refuses to let the familiar happen again. Aaliyah let those words breathe. You think they'll follow through, she asked. I think they have to now, Maya replied. Aaliyah offered a small, almost wistful smile. Maybe this isn't just my story anymore. Maybe it's part of something larger. Maya rested a hand lightly on her arm. It always was. They stood together in the quiet room, watching the city move below them. The world continued at its pace, unaware that a single act of dignity in the sky had begun reshaping the outlines of a familiar system. Aaliyah felt the faint stir of hope rise within her, a hope not for perfection, but for possibility. The afternoon unfolded with a quiet heaviness that settled deep inside Aaliyah's thoughts. After the call with Franklin Shaw, she remained near the window for a long time. The city breathed below, its movement steady and indifferent. Yet she felt as though every sound carried a deeper echo. Maya sat on the sofa, typing a message to their legal advisor, then stopped mid-sentence. She watched Aaliyah, sensing the quiet tension building beneath her calm surface. You're thinking something through, Maya said lightly, not wanting to intrude. Aaliyah didn't turn away from the window. Her reflection, gentle eyes, poised shoulders stared back at her, softened by the glass. There's more to this than a flight or an investigation, she said softly. It's unfolding faster than I expected. And larger? Maya rose, stepping closer. Larger how Aaliyah inhaled a long breath, letting it settle into her chest. People saw the story. Passengers took videos. Someone likely posted it already. By the time Shaw called, he had more pressure on him than he admitted. Maya's expression tightened. So the world knows. Or will know soon. Another message chimed on Aaliyah's phone, vibrating against the table. She reached for it slowly. A headline appeared at the top of her notifications panel. Passenger claims discrimination on Liberty Air flight. Investigation reportedly underway. Maya's eyes widened. It's already moving. Aaliyah opened the article. The photo wasn't of her. It showed a blurry image of the first-class cabin taken from behind. Just enough for viewers to sense something happened, but not enough to expose her identity. A small kindness from the internet, she murmured. For now, Maya replied gently. Aaliyah slid the phone onto the table. My name will be attached eventually. When the report is released, when Shaw speaks publicly, or when someone connects me to the flight manifest. Maya stepped closer. Does that worry you a little? But not in the way it used to. She paused. I just don't want the message to get buried under noise. If this turns into anger without direction, the real issue gets lost. Maya nodded slowly. And you want it to matter? Aaliyah's voice softened. I need it to matter. A knock sounded at the door. Aaliyah and Maya exchanged a glance before Maya moved toward it. When she opened the door, a young hotel staff member stood with a gentle smile, holding a small envelope for Dr. Grant. Maya accepted it, thanked her, then closed the door. She turned toward Aaliyah with a curious tilt of her head. Looks official. Aaliyah took the envelope, breaking the seal carefully. Inside was a short letter on Liberty Air stationery. Dr. Grant, we request your presence at a private meeting with the Executive Ethics Panel tomorrow. Your perspective will be essential in shaping our final response. Thank you for your time and patience. The signature at the bottom read, Caroline Hodge. Ethics Inquiry Lead? Aaliyah exhaled. They're moving faster than expected. Maya sank back onto the sofa. You think they're worried Aaliyah considered it? I think they understand the stakes. She folded the letter and set it aside. We'll need to prepare, she added. Not for conflict, but clarity. If I speak tomorrow, it must be purposeful. Maya nodded. You'll know what to say. You always do. Aaliyah smiled faintly, though a distant concern flickered across her features. She walked to the chair and sank into it slowly, pressing her palms against her knees. There's one thing I fear, she admitted quietly. Maya's voice dropped. Tell me. Aaliyah's eyes lowered. That all of this becomes about me instead of the issue. That the conversation turns into a spectacle of one woman punished, one woman compensated, one woman applauded, and the system stays the same. Maya felt those words settle like a quiet ache. You're not responsible for the reactions of the world, she said softly. Only for telling the truth you carry. Aaliyah nodded, but her gaze drifted back toward the window, drawn to the skyline again. Shadows stretched across buildings as lights flickered in office windows. A strange mix of calm and anticipation hung over the scene. After several breaths, she turned toward Maya. Walk with me, I need to clear my mind. Of course, they left the room together and moved through the hotel's quiet corridor. In the elevator, the music hummed softly, an almost soothing rhythm that neither paid much attention to. When the doors opened, the lobby greeted them with warm light and gentle echoes. Outside, the air felt crisp, carrying the faint scent of the nearby harbor. Cars drifted leisurely along the street. People moved unhurriedly along the sidewalks, wrapped in their own thoughts. Aaliyah and Maya strolled without speaking at first. The rhythm of their steps aligned naturally. After a block, Aaliyah's voice emerged, low and reflective. When I was younger, I believed if I worked hard enough, I could outrun moments like this. That success would shield me. Maya listened quietly, giving her the space she needed. But it never worked. Aaliyah continued. No matter how high I climbed, someone always found a way to remind me they could reduce me to a stereotype with a single glance. She paused, her breath steadying, and I let it cut deeper than it should have, because I kept hoping the next space would be different. Maya spoke gently, and tonight showed that you're not alone anymore. People are seeing the patterns. They're speaking up. Aaliyah lifted her gaze to the horizon. I don't want their voices drowned out. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want the focus to be on the people who've lived this in silence for years. They walked past a coffee shop where a trio of young women laughed over steaming cups. A couple shared fries at a small outdoor table. A man tapped rhythm on a newspaper stand while humming to himself. Life, in its simple forms, continued. Aaliyah slowed near a small overlook where twinkling city lights reflected off the water. She rested her hand on the metal railing. Maya stepped beside her. You don't have to be perfect tomorrow, she said. You just have to be honest. Aaliyah's eyes softened. Honesty I can give. They stood there quietly, letting the city hum beneath them. A vibration broke the stillness. Aaliyah checked her phone. Another message. Shaw again. Full board meeting scheduled for tomorrow. Public statement being drafted. We hope to share our direction with your input. Aaliyah read it twice before lowering the phone. This is moving into public territory now. Maya nodded, calm but alert. Are you ready? Aaliyah inhaled deeply, letting the breath settle her. I think this moment has been waiting for me longer than I realized. She lifted her eyes toward the skyline. Her voice weighted with quiet conviction. This story was never just mine. It belongs to everyone who didn't get the chance to speak. Maya smiled gently. Then tomorrow, you speak for them. Aaliyah let a long breath release, not in exhaustion, but in acceptance. Tomorrow, the world would listen. The next day unfolded with a softness that almost felt unreal. Not because the world had grown kinder overnight, but because something inside Aaliyah had shifted. She woke early, not from anxiety, but from a steady clarity that wrapped itself around her like a quiet promise. The sky outside her hotel window carried a faint glow. The city, usually restless, seemed to move at a slower pace. She sat at the edge of the bed, with her hands resting lightly against her knees, listening to the distant hum of passing cars. A gentle knock sounded at her door. It's me. Maya. Aaliyah opened it to find her standing there with 2 cups of coffee. One black, one with a hint of vanilla. The unspoken ritual between them was familiar, almost comforting. You doing all right? Maya asked. Aaliyah nodded, accepting the warm cup. Yes, more ready than I expected to be. Maya exhaled with relief and set her own cup on the table. The meeting is scheduled in 2 hours. Shaw's assistant sent the details. They're expecting you in a private conference room in the company's regional office. No press, just the ethics panel, a few executives, and Shaw. Aaliyah nodded again. Calm, steady, prepared. Thank you, she said softly. Her voice held no bravado, just truth. They spent the next hour reviewing documents, notes, timelines. Maya read through the inquiry list while Aaliyah listened, offering small adjustments when needed. The preparation wasn't about rehearsing answers, it was about grounding herself in intention. When they finally stepped into the hotel elevator, Maya glanced at her with a quiet admiration. No matter what happens, she said, you're walking in with integrity. That's more than enough. Aaliyah's eyes softened. Integrity is the one thing no one can strip away. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped outside into the crisp air. A black sedan awaited them. The ride was silent but not heavy. Aaliyah watched the city through the window as it glided past in gentle waves. The buildings, the trees, the distant shoreline, all of it moved with a calm rhythm. She felt the same calm echo within herself. When they arrived at the Liberty Air regional office, the building towered above them with sleek glass panels reflecting the shifting clouds. A receptionist escorted them through a quiet corridor lined with framed photos from decades of aviation history. Smiling flight attendants, families boarding planes, captains shaking hands with children. Aaliyah felt a small irony settle in her chest. The images showed hospitality, promise, and pride, yet the truth beneath had cracks invisible to the camera lens. They reached the conference room. A soft light glowed from within. A long table stood at the center, polished and cold. Shaw rose from his seat when he saw her. Dr. Grant, thank you for coming. Aaliyah nodded respectfully. Thank you for asking me to. Caroline Hodge sat to Shaw's right, her expression firm but thoughtful. Several other panel members occupied the remaining seats. All of them carried the look of individuals who understood the gravity of the moment. Please sit, Shaw said. Aaliyah took her place. Maya sat behind her, close enough to be a steady presence, far enough not to overshadow the discussion. Shaw folded his hands. We appreciate your patience these past hours. We want to begin by acknowledging that the initial findings confirm multiple breaches of protocol, as well as repeated patterns of biased service behavior among certain crew members. The data from your flight and previous ones align, Caroline added gently. We believe your experience may represent issues deeper than any singular flight, and we want to learn from it. Aaliyah took a slow breath, letting her words settle before they formed. I'm grateful for the investigation, she said softly. But I want to be clear about something. This isn't about punishing individuals alone. It's about understanding what shaped their actions. Systems don't break overnight. They fracture in small ways over years, and people learn to move within those fractures. A panel member leaned forward. What would you like us to understand most? Aaliyah met his eyes. That dignity is not a luxury. It's not something reserved for certain passengers, certain appearances, certain accents. Every person who steps on a plane carries a story, a history, a life that deserves basic respect. Caroline nodded slowly, absorbing each word. Shaw cleared his throat. We agree. And we're committed to change. We're implementing new AI oversight, new training models, new accountability measures. But we want your guidance to ensure this transformation is meaningful. Aaliyah listened quietly, then spoke with measured clarity. If I help you, and it won't be as a figurehead, I don't want to be the face of someone else's crisis. I want to help build a culture where people don't have to fear being overlooked or dismissed because they don't fit someone's expectation. Shaw nodded once. That's precisely why we want your leadership. Aaliyah paused. The room felt still, as though every breath had paused midair. I'll accept, she said finally, but only if the work remains centered on real reform. Not apologies, not public relations. True, structural change. Caroline smiled faintly. Then we begin today. A subtle shift moved through the room. Not a release, but a recognition. This was the turning point. After the meeting, Shaw walked them to the elevator. Thank you again, he said sincerely. Not for the pressure you placed on us, but for the grace with which you carried it. Aaliyah met his gaze. Grace isn't silence, Mr. Shaw. It's discipline, and sometimes discipline is all we have until someone listens. He nodded, humbled. The elevator doors opened. Aaliyah and Maya stepped inside. When they reached the lobby, Maya let out a breath she had been holding. You handled that flawlessly. Aaliyah shook her head gently. I handled it truthfully. Flawlessly isn't the goal. Outside, a small group of people gathered near the sidewalk. A young woman stepped forward hesitantly. Excuse me, are you Dr. Grant? Aaliyah froze for a moment in quiet surprise. Yes. The woman swallowed, eyes softening. I saw the story online. I just wanted to say, what you did mattered. I've been on flights where I felt invisible, and I always told myself it was nothing. Hearing what happened to you, it made me feel less alone. Aaliyah's chest warmed. Thank you, she said softly. Another person approached, then another. Some spoke quietly. Some simply nodded. Some just looked at her with gratitude in their eyes. It wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was human. Aaliyah felt the weight of it settle into her bones. Not heaviness, but purpose. Maya touched her arm lightly. You see, it wasn't just your story. Aaliyah looked at the people gathered, a mosaic of faces, cultures, ages, all standing there because they recognized something familiar in her fight. She whispered to Maya, voice filled with gentle resolve. This is why we speak. The crowd parted as she stepped forward, not as a symbol, but as a woman choosing dignity over silence. Not for herself alone, but for everyone who had ever been told to shrink. Aaliyah Grant's story is about more than just a denied meal. It's emblematic of moments we've all faced in our lives, moments where we've been underestimated, overlooked, or treated unfairly because someone else thought they had the right to do so. The most beautiful thing about Aaliyah is not her explosive strength, but her quiet strength. She doesn't scream. She doesn't make a scene. She doesn't try to prove herself. She just chooses to stand up in the right way, at the right time, and for reasons bigger than herself. The lesson for us, especially those of us who have gone through many of life's experiences, is this: dignity does not require shouting. It requires persistence. Sometimes calmness is the loudest voice. Sometimes choosing not to let go is the greatest kindness, not only for ourselves, but for those who come after us. And most importantly, no one is born to be considered less valuable. Whether in the family, at work, or in society, every person deserves a place, respect, and a 1A seat for themselves. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If it touches something in your heart, if it brings back memories, thoughts, or feelings that you have kept hidden, please leave a little sign to let us know that meaningful stories like this still need to be told. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so that each week we can open up more profound, healing, and valuable journeys for the soul. You deserve to hear and see stories that make us believe in the good,